I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia Middleton standing at my fence line, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my goats like they were some kind of biohazard. It was a Thursday morning in late April, and I had just moved into my property in rural Spokane County, Washington, 3 months prior. The place was perfect, 5 acres of rolling pasture with a modest farmhouse that needed work but had good bones. I had been dreaming about this for years, working 70-hour weeks as a software engineer in Seattle just to save enough money to buy land and start a small homestead. My name is Zachary Emerson, and at 34 years old, I had finally escaped the city to live the life I actually wanted. The property came with everything I needed: a barn that was structurally sound, good fencing, a well that pumped clean water, and most importantly, it was zoned for agricultural use. I had done my research, spent hours at the county planning office making sure I could keep livestock. The zoning was AG5, which meant agricultural use on 5-acre minimum parcels. I was golden, or so I thought. Patricia was the president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, a collection of about 40 properties that had been developed 15 years ago on former farmland. The developer had carved up 100 acres into these lots, with my 5-acre parcel being one of the larger ones on the edge of the development. Most of my neighbors had 1 or 2 acres, and the HOA had been formed to maintain common areas and supposedly preserve property values. I had noticed the CCRs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions when I bought the place. My real estate agent had given me a thick packet of paperwork that included the HOA bylaws. I had skimmed them, saw a bunch of stuff about paint colors and fence heights, but nothing that concerned me. The property was agricultural. That was what mattered. "Mr. Emerson," Patricia called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She was wearing white capri pants and a pastel pink blouse, despite the fact that the ground was still muddy from recent rain. Her blonde highlighted hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail that made her face look even more severe. "We need to talk about your animals." I walked over from the barn where I had been fixing a gate hinge. My hands were dirty, and I wiped them on my jeans as I approached. I had 4 goats, 2 Nubian does named Pepper and Sage, and 2 Nigerian dwarf wethers named Chip and Dale. They were friendly, curious animals that provided milk, helped clear brush, and honestly, just made me happy. They were standing near the fence, watching Patricia with the same wary interest I felt. "Morning, Patricia," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What about them?" "They need to go," she said flatly. "The HOA board met last night and we reviewed the bylaws. Section 7, subsection C clearly states that no livestock animals are permitted on any property within Meadowbrook Estates." I felt my jaw tighten. "This property is zoned agricultural. I checked with the county before I bought it." "The HOA bylaws supersede county zoning," Patricia said with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. "When you purchased this property, you agreed to abide by our rules. Livestock are prohibited. You have 30 days to remove them, or we will begin fining you $500 per day per animal, $2,000 a day in fines." I felt my stomach drop. "You cannot be serious." "Completely serious," she replied. "Meadowbrook Estates is a residential community. We maintain certain standards. Your goats are noisy, they smell, and they are bringing down property values. Several of your neighbors have complained." The goats were not noisy. Nigerian dwarfs barely made any sound at all, and the Nubians only bleated when they wanted attention. As for smell, I cleaned their shelter every other day and composted the bedding properly. My property was cleaner than most of the overgrown yards I had seen in the neighborhood. "I need to see that section of the bylaws," I said. Patricia pulled a folder from her oversized designer purse and handed me a photocopied page. Sure enough, there it was. Section 7. C. No livestock animals, including but not limited to horses, cattle, pigs, sheep, or goats, shall be kept on any property within the boundaries of Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. I read it 3 times, feeling anger build in my chest. When were these bylaws written? "The original CCRs were filed in 2009 when the development was created," Patricia said smugly. "And nobody thought to check if they conflicted with county zoning ordinances?" "They do not conflict. The HOA has the legal right to impose restrictions beyond what the county requires. You agreed to this when you bought the property." I had signed a mountain of paperwork at closing. The title company had pushed page after page in front of me, and I had signed them all, trusting that my agent and the lawyers had done their jobs. I'd never imagined the HOA could override county agricultural zoning. "I'm not getting rid of my goats," I said firmly. Patricia's expression hardened. "Then you will be fined. The board voted unanimously. You have 30 days, Mr. Emerson. I suggest you use them wisely." She turned and walked back to her white Lexus SUV that was parked on the road, her heels sinking into my gravel driveway with each step. I stood there watching her drive away, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. I went inside and immediately started researching. My laptop was still set up on the kitchen table, surrounded by moving boxes I had not yet unpacked. I pulled up the Spokane County Code and found the section on agricultural zoning. G5 parcels were specifically designated for farming and ranching activities. Permitted uses included crop production, livestock raising, and agricultural buildings. There were regulations about setbacks and animal units per acre, but my 4 goats did not even come close to the limits. Then I found something interesting. Washington State RCW 36.70A, the Growth Management Act, had provisions about agricultural lands. Counties were required to protect and preserve agricultural activities. I dug deeper and found cases where agricultural rights had been upheld over HOA restrictions. But I needed help. This was way beyond my expertise. I called my real estate agent first, a guy named Tom who had seemed knowledgeable during the buying process. "Tom, it's Zachary Emerson. I bought the property on Meadowbrook Lane back in January." "Sure, Zach, I remember. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, telling him about Patricia's visit and the HOA bylaws. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's rough, man," Tom finally said. "I mean, the CCRs were disclosed. You signed acknowledging you received them." "But the property is agricultural," I protested. "How can HOA rules override county zoning?" "Look, I'm not a lawyer, but generally, yes, HOAs can impose stricter rules than what the county allows. Just because the county says you can do something does not mean the HOA has to permit it. I'm sorry, Zach. I really am." I hung up feeling defeated, but not ready to give up. I spent the rest of the day calling attorneys. The first 3 I reached did not handle HOA disputes. The fourth one, a guy named Richard who specialized in real estate law, agreed to meet with me the next day. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about my goats, about the months of planning that had gone into this move, about the life I was trying to build. I'd left a 6-figure job because I was burned out and miserable. I wanted to grow my own food, raise animals, live simply. The idea of some power-hungry HOA president taking that away made my blood boil. Richard's office was in downtown Spokane, in a modest building near the courthouse. He was in his late 50s with gray hair and reading glasses that he kept pushing up his nose. His office was cluttered with case files and law books. "So you've got an HOA telling you to get rid of livestock on agricultural property," Richard said, leaning back in his chair after I explained everything. "That's an interesting situation." "Can they do this?" I asked. "Legally, it is complicated. HOAs derive their authority from the CCRs, which are essentially a private contract between property owners. When you bought the property, you technically agreed to those terms. However, there is a question of whether those restrictions are enforceable when they conflict with the property's designated use under county zoning." "So what do I do?" Richard tapped his pen against his desk. "First, I need to review all the documents, the CCRs, your deed, the county zoning ordinances, everything. Then we need to look at Washington state case law on agricultural rights. There have been cases where courts have ruled in favor of farmers over HOAs, but every situation is different. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $5,000. This could take months to resolve, possibly longer if it goes to court. You could be looking at $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees, maybe more." I felt sick. I had a decent amount of savings, but not unlimited funds. The whole point of moving here was to live more affordably. What are my chances? Honestly, 50-50, maybe 60-40 in your favor if we can establish that the agricultural zoning was in place before the HOA was formed and that the county has a strong interest in preserving agricultural use. but HOAs win these cases too. Judges generally uphold private contracts. I left Richard's office feeling overwhelmed. $30,000 in legal fees, $2,000 a day in potential fines, and no guarantee of winning. Over the weekend, I did more research. I found the Spokane County Agricultural Preservation Program, which had been established to protect farmland from being converted to residential use. I found county ordinances that specifically encouraged agricultural activities and provided protections for farmers against nuisance complaints. Monday morning, I drove to the Spokane County Planning Department. The office was in a government building on the north side of town, a bland concrete structure that housed various county services. I waited in line for 20 minutes before getting to speak with someone at the counter. "I need information about agricultural zoning and HOA restrictions," I told the clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 40s. She directed me to a planning specialist named Gary, who had an office in the back. Gary was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with a beard and flannel shirt that made him look more like a logger than a bureaucrat. "Zach Emerson," I said, shaking his hand. "I've got a situation." I explained everything, showing him the property address, the zoning designation, and the HOA bylaws. Gary listened carefully, occasionally making notes. "This comes up more than you would think," Gary said when I finished. "Developers create these HOAs on agricultural land, but they do not bother checking if their restrictions conflict with county ordinances. Here's the thing, though. County zoning law is superior to private HOA rules when it comes to permitted land uses." "Seriously?" I felt a spark of hope. "Absolutely. Your property is zoned AG5. That means agricultural use is not just permitted, it is the primary intended use. The county has invested significant resources in preserving agricultural lands under the Growth Management Act. An HOA cannot simply override that with their bylaws." "Can you put that in writing?" Gary smiled. "I can do better than that. I can give you a copy of the county's Agricultural Protection Ordinance and a letter explaining that your use is consistent with county zoning. If the HOA wants to fight it, they would have to challenge the county's zoning authority, which is a much bigger fight than just going after you." He spent the next hour pulling together documents for me. He printed out the relevant sections of county code, highlighted the parts about agricultural protection, and wrote a letter on official county letterhead explaining that livestock keeping was a permitted use on AG5 parcels and that the county supported agricultural activities. "One more thing," Gary said as I was getting ready to leave. "You might want to contact the county's Agricultural Extension Office. They have resources for people dealing with this kind of conflict. There's also a state law, RCW 7.48.305, which protects agricultural activities from being declared nuisances." I left the planning office with a folder full of ammunition. For the first time since Patricia's visit, I felt like I had a fighting chance. That afternoon, I drafted a response to the HOA. I kept it professional but firm. I stated that my property was zoned for agricultural use, that my livestock were permitted under county ordinance, and that the HOA's restrictions were unenforceable because they conflicted with Superior County zoning law. I attached copies of everything Gary had given me. I sent it certified mail to Patricia and the HOA board. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got a response. It was not from Patricia. It was from a law firm in Spokane representing the HOA. The letter was 2 pages of legal jargon that boiled down to, "Remove the goats or face fines and legal action." I called Richard immediately. They lawyered up. "Expected," Richard said calmly. "Send me everything. I will draft a response." The next week was tense. I went about my daily routine, taking care of the goats, working on the property, trying not to think about the fight brewing. But every time I saw Patricia drive by, slowing down to glare at my animals, I felt my anger spike. Then I got an idea. If the county supported agricultural use, maybe I could get the county commissioners involved. I started attending county planning commission meetings, introducing myself, explaining my situation. Most of the commissioners were sympathetic. Agricultural preservation was a big issue in Spokane County, with farmland constantly under pressure from development. At one meeting, I met a commissioner named Frank Delgado. Frank was in his 60s, a retired farmer who had served on the commission for 15 years. After the meeting, he pulled me aside. "I heard about your situation," Frank said. "HOAs have been a thorn in the side of agriculture for years. They move into rural areas and then complain about farm activities. It is ridiculous." "Is there anything the county can do?" I asked. Frank thought for a moment. "The commission could pass a resolution affirming agricultural rights. It would not have the force of law, but it would put the county officially on record supporting your position. Might make the HOA think twice about pushing this." "That would be amazing." "Let me talk to the other commissioners. We have got a meeting in 2 weeks. I will see if we can get it on the agenda." I left that meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. But the next day, I got hit with another blow. A certified letter from the HOA informing me that my 30-day deadline had passed and fines were now being assessed. $500 per day per animal, $2,000 a day total. I called Richard immediately. "They are actually doing it. The fines started today." "Do not pay them," Richard said. "If you pay, you are acknowledging the legitimacy of their authority. We fight this." "But they can put a lien on my property." "They can try. But if we can prove their bylaws are unenforceable, any lien would be invalid. I am drafting a motion for declaratory relief. We are going to ask a judge to rule that the agricultural zoning supersedes the HOA restrictions." "How long will that take?" "Months probably, but it is our best option." I hung up and walked out to the pasture. The goats came running over, expecting treats. Pepper nudged my hand with her nose, and I scratched behind her ears. These were not just animals to me. They were part of the life I was building, the dream I had worked years to achieve. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. The HOA started sending threatening letters weekly. Patricia showed up at my property twice more, each time with a different board member, taking pictures of the goats and making notes. I ignored them, focusing on building my case. Richard filed the motion for declaratory relief in Spokane County Superior Court. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the County Planning Commission scheduled my issue for their next meeting. I prepared thoroughly for that commission meeting. I printed out photos of my property, showing how well maintained it was. I gathered testimonials from my immediate neighbors, the ones who actually lived next to me and had no problem with the goats. I compiled research on the economic and environmental benefits of small-scale agriculture. The meeting was held in the County Administration Building on a Tuesday evening. The room was packed, which surprised me. Apparently, word had gotten around about the issue, and a lot of local farmers and agricultural advocates had shown up to support me. I presented my case to the commission, explaining the situation and asking for their support. Then Patricia stood up. "This is not about agriculture," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is about one man thinking he is above the rules. Mr. Emerson bought property in a residential community with established standards. He knew about the HOA bylaws. He is simply refusing to comply because he thinks he is special." "The property is zoned agricultural," I countered. "I am using it exactly as the county intended." "The HOA has the legal right to impose additional restrictions," Patricia shot back. "We are protecting property values for all our residents." Commissioner Delgado leaned forward. "Ms. Middleton, how many properties in Meadowbrook Estates are zoned agricultural?" Patricia hesitated. "I'm not sure of the exact number." 17, Delgado said. I looked it up. Out of 40 properties in your HOA, 17 are zoned AG5, including yours, which means agricultural use is not just permitted. It was the intended purpose when the county approved that zoning designation. "That was before the development was built," Patricia argued. "The zoning has not changed," Delgado replied, "and the county has a strong public policy interest in preserving agricultural lands. Your HOA restrictions directly conflict with that policy." The debate went on for another 30 minutes. Finally, the commission voted 4-1 in favor of passing a resolution supporting agricultural rights and affirming that county zoning supersedes HOA restrictions for permitted agricultural uses. Patricia was furious. As people were filing out of the meeting, she cornered me in the hallway. "This is not over," she hissed. "The commission's resolution means nothing. We will see you in court." "Looking forward to it," I replied. But the resolution did mean something. It gave me leverage. It showed that the county was officially backing my position. Richard was thrilled when I told him. "This is great," he said. "It is not binding on the court, but it shows public policy. Judges pay attention to that." The weeks leading up to the court hearing were stressful. The HOA continued to assess fines, which now totaled over $80,000 on paper. They sent multiple demand letters. Patricia drove by my property almost daily. But I also started getting support from unexpected places. Local news picked up the story. A reporter from the Spokane Review interviewed me, and the article ran on the front page of the local section. The headline read, "HOA versus Goats. County supports farmers' right to agricultural use." The story resonated with people. I started getting emails and letters from other rural property owners who had dealt with similar HOA conflicts. A local agricultural advocacy group reached out, offering to help with legal costs if needed. Then, a week before the hearing, something interesting happened. I got a call from a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Emerson, this is Gloria Thompson. I live in Meadowbrook Estates on Willow Lane." I remembered the name. She was on the HOA board, one of the people who had supposedly voted unanimously to ban my goats. "What can I do for you, Ms. Thompson?" I asked cautiously. "I wanted you to know that I did not vote to fine you," Gloria said. Her voice was quiet, almost nervous. "Patricia told us at the board meeting that you were violating county law with your animals. She said the county had issued a complaint. That was why we voted to enforce the bylaws. But I saw the article in the paper, and I realized she lied to us." I sat down processing this. "She told you the county had a problem with my goats?" "Yes. She showed us what she said was a complaint from the county planning office, but it was not real, was it?" "No. The county fully supports my agricultural use. They passed a resolution affirming it." Gloria was silent for a moment. "I am resigning from the board, and I think you should know that there are other people in the neighborhood who are upset about how Patricia has handled this. She's been using HOA funds to pay for the attorney without proper board approval. I think she has spent over $15,000 so far." This was huge. If Patricia had lied to the board and misused HOA funds, that could change everything. "Would you be willing to testify to that?" I asked. "Yes," Gloria said firmly. "I am tired of the bullying and the lies. This whole thing has been wrong from the start." I immediately called Richard and told him. He was equally excited. "If we can show that the board president lied and misused funds, it could undermine their entire case. I will subpoena her for the hearing." The day of the hearing arrived. It was a gray, drizzly morning in early June. I put on my only suit, which I had not worn since moving to Washington, and drove to the courthouse. Richard met me outside. "Ready?" he asked. "As I will ever be." The courtroom was surprisingly full. Besides me, Richard, Patricia, and the HOA's attorney, there were at least a dozen people in the gallery. I recognized some of them from the Planning Commission meeting, farmers and agricultural advocates who had come to show support. Judge Margaret Sullivan presided. She was in her 50s, with dark hair going gray and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the motions quickly, then looked up. "This is a request for declaratory relief regarding the enforceability of HOA bylaws on agriculturally zoned property," she said. "Mr. Keller, you represent the plaintiff?" "Yes, Your Honor," Richard stood. "Our position is straightforward. Mr. Emerson owns property zoned AG5 under Spokane County Code. Agricultural use, including livestock, is explicitly permitted under that zoning. The HOA's attempt to prohibit such use is unenforceable because it conflicts with Superior County zoning law." The HOA's attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named David Warren, stood up. "Your Honor, HOAs have well-established authority to impose restrictions beyond what government zoning allows. The plaintiff signed a binding contract when he purchased the property, agreeing to abide by the CCRs. He is simply trying to avoid his contractual obligations." Judge Sullivan looked at the documents in front of her. "Mr. Keller, is there precedent for zoning law superseding HOA restrictions?" "Yes, Your Honor." Richard pulled out a brief with several case citations. In Bennett v. Cedar Falls Homeowners Association, the Washington Court of Appeals ruled that HOA restrictions cannot prohibit uses that are explicitly permitted under local zoning ordinances when those ordinances reflect a strong public policy interest. Here, Spokane County has made clear through its agricultural protection ordinances and the Planning Commission's resolution that preserving agricultural use is a priority. Mr. Warren, your response? Those cases are distinguishable, Your Honor. They involved commercial uses, not residential communities. The HOA has a legitimate interest in maintaining residential character and property values. But the property is not zoned residential, Judge Sullivan pointed out. It is zoned agricultural. How can an HOA maintain residential character on property that is not designated as residential? Warren stumbled over his response, and I felt a glimmer of hope. The hearing went on for 2 hours. Richard called me to testify, and I explained my background, my plans for the property, and how I had verified the agricultural zoning before purchasing. Then he called Gary from the county planning office, who testified about the county's agricultural protection policies. Finally, Richard called Gloria Thompson. Patricia's face went white when Gloria took the stand. Under oath, Gloria explained how Patricia had misrepresented the situation to the board, claiming the county had issued a complaint about my goats when no such complaint existed. She also testified about the unauthorized legal expenses. Did the board vote to spend $15,000 on attorney fees for this matter? Richard asked. No, Gloria said firmly. Patricia approved those payments without a board vote. She told us she was handling it. When it was Warren's turn to question Gloria, he tried to minimize her testimony, but the damage was done. Judge Sullivan looked displeased. After all the testimony, Judge Sullivan took a short recess to review the materials. When she came back, she delivered her ruling. This court finds that Spokane County's agricultural zoning ordinances represent a clear public policy in favor of preserving agricultural use on designated agricultural lands. The plaintiff's property is zoned AG5, which explicitly permits livestock. While HOAs generally have broad authority to impose restrictions, that authority cannot override superior government regulations, particularly when those regulations reflect strong public policy interests. I felt my heart racing. Furthermore, Judge Sullivan continued, the evidence suggests that the HOA board may not have been fully informed about the basis for this enforcement action, which raises questions about the legitimacy of the fines assessed. Therefore, this court declares that the Meadowbrook Estates HOA bylaws are unenforceable insofar as they prohibit livestock on property zoned for agricultural use. The plaintiff may maintain his livestock in accordance with county regulations. All fines assessed by the HOA are voided. Each party shall bear their own costs. I almost collapsed with relief. Richard squeezed my shoulder. We won. Patricia stood up, her face red. This is outrageous. Your Honor, the HOA has rights. The HOA has the right to enforce valid restrictions, Judge Sullivan said sternly. It does not have the right to prohibit uses that are explicitly permitted under county zoning law. This hearing is adjourned. Walking out of the courthouse felt surreal. Several people from the gallery congratulated me. A reporter from the local news asked for an interview, which I gave, keeping it brief and focusing on the importance of agricultural preservation. But the story was not quite over. 2 days after the hearing, I got a call from Gloria Thompson again. Zach, I thought you should know. There was an emergency HOA board meeting last night. Patricia was removed as president. The board voted to accept the court's ruling and drop any further legal action. We are also going to be reviewing all of her financial decisions and possibly pursuing legal action against her for misuse of funds. Wow, I said. I did not expect that. A lot of people are angry about how much money she wasted on this vendetta, and lying to the board was the final straw. I am sorry you had to go through all this. Thank you for standing up and telling the truth, I said. Over the next few weeks, things settled down. Patricia resigned from the HOA entirely, and I heard through the grapevine that she was trying to sell her property and move. The new HOA board president reached out to me, apologizing for the conflict and assuring me there would be no further issues. The local agricultural community rallied around me. I was invited to speak at a county agricultural preservation workshop, sharing my story and encouraging other farmers to know their rights. The county even used my case as an example when updating their agricultural protection ordinances. I also learned more about what had happened with Patricia. Apparently, the HOA did pursue action against her for misuse of funds. She had spent over $20,000 in HOA money on legal fees without proper authorization. The board demanded reimbursement, and when she refused, they filed a civil suit. She eventually settled, paying back $12,000. But there was more. During the investigation into her handling of HOA finances, the board discovered she had been taking money from the HOA operating account for personal use. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, but over 2 years it added up to nearly $8,000. That was embezzlement. Gloria called me when they discovered it. "We are going to the police," she said. "This is criminal." The Spokane County Sheriff's Office got involved. A detective interviewed board members and reviewed financial records. In September, 4 months after the court hearing, Patricia Middleton was arrested and charged with theft in the second degree, a Class C felony. I did not take pleasure in her arrest, but I did feel vindicated. She had not just been overzealous about HOA rules, she had been a bully and a thief who abused her position. Her case went through the court system slowly. She initially pleaded not guilty, but faced with overwhelming evidence, she eventually took a plea deal. In February of the following year, she pleaded guilty to theft in the third degree, a gross misdemeanor. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail, though 60 days were suspended, and she was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA plus fines and court costs. Through all of this, my life went on. I expanded my little homestead, adding chickens and ducks. I planted a large vegetable garden and started selling produce at the local farmers market. The goats continued to thrive, and Pepper had kids in the spring, 2 adorable duelings that I named Rosemary and Thyme. I also got more involved in local agricultural advocacy. I joined the board of a nonprofit that worked to preserve farmland and support beginning farmers. My experience with the HOA became a cautionary tale we shared with people buying rural property, educating them about the importance of understanding both zoning laws and HOA restrictions. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA underwent significant changes. The new board revised the bylaws to align with county zoning regulations, explicitly acknowledging that agricultural uses were permitted on AG 5 parcels. They also implemented better financial controls and oversight to prevent future abuse. Interestingly, my case inspired other property owners in the development. 2 other families who owned AG 5 parcels started keeping chickens. Another neighbor, a guy named Marcus who had a 3-acre lot, started a small berry farm. The character of Meadowbrook Estates began to shift, becoming less of a suburban development and more of a rural community that embraced its agricultural roots. I became friends with several of my neighbors, particularly those who appreciated the agricultural aspects of the area. We started having informal gatherings, sharing knowledge about gardening and animal husbandry. It became the community I had hoped for when I moved here. My relationship with Richard, the attorney, also continued. He became a friend and occasional advisor as I navigated other aspects of rural property ownership. He told me my case had opened his eyes to the conflicts between HOAs and agricultural preservation, and he started taking on more cases like mine. Looking back, the entire ordeal was stressful and expensive. Between legal fees and the time I spent fighting the HOA, it cost me probably $30,000 and countless hours of stress. But it was worth it. I stood up for my rights, protected my property, and helped establish important precedents for agricultural preservation in Spokane County. The goats, blissfully unaware of the legal battle fought on their behalf, continued to be wonderful animals. They cleared brush, provided milk, and gave me endless entertainment with their antics. Watching them hop and play in the pasture never got old. One afternoon in late summer, about a year after the court hearing, I was sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sun set over the pasture. The goats were settled in for the evening, the chickens were roosting, and the garden was producing more tomatoes and zucchini than I could possibly use. Gloria Thompson stopped by. She had become a friend through all of this, someone who had shown courage in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. "Beautiful evening," she said, accepting a glass of tea and sitting in the chair next to me. They usually are out here, I replied. I wanted to tell you something, Gloria said. There is a family looking at buying Patricia's old house. They have kids and they are really excited about the rural setting. The real estate agent told them about your goats, and they thought it was great. They are actually planning to get chickens themselves, I smiled. That's good to hear. You changed this place, Zach, for the better. People are not afraid anymore to actually use their property the way it was meant to be used. I just stood up for my rights, I said. Anyone would have done the same. No, Gloria said firmly. Most people would have given up, would have sold the goats and moved on. You fought and you won, and now everyone benefits. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn pink and orange. In the distance, I could hear one of my neighbor's roosters crowing. The sound made me happy. The legal precedent from my case became part of Spokane County's official guidance on agricultural rights. The planning department created a handout for property owners explaining how agricultural zoning interacted with HOA restrictions, using my situation as a case study. Gary from the planning office told me it had already helped several other property owners avoid similar conflicts. At the state level, there was even talk of legislation to clarify the relationship between agricultural zoning and HOA authority. A state representative who had read about my case introduced a bill that would explicitly protect agricultural uses on agricultural land from HOA restrictions. It did not pass that session, but it started a conversation. My story also got picked up by agricultural publications and homesteading blogs. I did several interviews, always emphasizing the same points. Know your zoning, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up to bullies even when they have the backing of an HOA. The farmers market where I sold my produce became another source of community. I met other small farmers and homesteaders, people who understood the lifestyle I had chosen. We traded seeds and cuttings, shared advice about pest control and soil management, and supported each other's businesses. One of the other vendors, a woman named Sarah who raised heritage breed pigs, had gone through a similar HOA conflict years earlier in a different county. She had not fought it, had sold her animals, and eventually moved. She told me she regretted not standing up for herself. You did what I should have done, she said. Do not ever doubt that you did the right thing. As winter approached, I reflected on everything that had happened. Moving to this property had been a dream come true, but it had also been a test. The HOA conflict could have broken me, could have forced me to give up on the life I wanted. But I had persevered, had learned to fight for what mattered, and had come out stronger. The goats needed winter shelter improvements, so I spent November building them a better barn section with proper ventilation and insulation. The physical work was satisfying, a reminder that I was building something real and lasting. Christmas that year was quiet and perfect. I had my parents visit from Oregon, and they were amazed by what I had accomplished. My dad, who had always been skeptical about my decision to leave my tech career, admitted that I seemed happier than he had ever seen me. You found your place, he said, looking out over the property. That is worth more than any salary. As the year drew to a close, I thought about resolutions. I decided mine would be to continue building the life I wanted, to keep learning and growing, and to help others who faced similar challenges. The fight with the HOA had taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that standing up for what was right mattered, and that community support could make all the difference. The legal bills were finally paid off. Richard had actually reduced his final invoice, telling me that the case had been professionally valuable to him and he appreciated the opportunity to work on something meaningful. The total cost ended up being around $22,000, still a huge amount but manageable. I framed the court order declaring that the HOA bylaws were unenforceable regarding agricultural use. It hung in my office, a reminder of the battle won and the principle established. Whenever I felt discouraged or overwhelmed by the challenges of homesteading, I looked at that document and remembered that I had fought City Hall, or in this case, the HOA, and won. Spring came again, bringing new life to the farm. Pepper had another set of kids, triplets this time. The garden needed planning and planting. The chicken flock needed to be expanded. There was always work to do, but it was work I loved. The Meadowbrook Estates community continued to evolve. The new HOA board was focused on actual community building rather than enforcement. They organized neighborhood potlucks and work parties to maintain common areas. The atmosphere was completely different from the hostile environment Patricia had created. I even served on an HOA committee that reviewed and updated the bylaws. We worked hard to make sure the rules were reasonable, clearly written, and aligned with county regulations. It was satisfying to be part of the solution, helping to create an HOA that actually served its members rather than dictating to them. In April, I got a call from a reporter working on a story about agricultural preservation for a national magazine. She had heard about my case and wanted to feature it in an article about rural property rights. The article came out in June and reached a wide audience. I started getting emails from people all over the country who were dealing with similar issues. I tried to help where I could, sharing the documents from my case, explaining the legal principles, and connecting people with resources. It felt good to turn my struggle into something that could benefit others. By the second anniversary of moving to the property, I had accomplished most of my initial goals. The homestead was productive and well established. I was making a modest income from selling produce, eggs, and occasionally goat kids. I had built a life that aligned with my values and made me genuinely happy. I also started teaching workshops on urban farming and homesteading at the local extension office. Sharing knowledge and helping others get started was incredibly rewarding. Many of my students faced their own challenges with zoning, neighbors, or HOAs, and I could speak from experience about overcoming those obstacles. The goats remained the heart of the operation. They were productive, providing milk that I used to make cheese and soap. But more than that, they were companions. Coming home after a difficult day and being greeted by their enthusiastic bleating never failed to improve my mood. I expanded into fiber production, getting a couple of Angora goats whose mohair I learned to spin and weave. It was a new skill that connected me to traditional crafts and opened up another small income stream. The learning curve was steep, but I enjoyed the challenge. The property itself continued to improve. I planted fruit trees and berry bushes, invested in better fencing, and built a greenhouse for extending the growing season. Every improvement felt like an investment in my future, in the life I was building. There were still challenges, of course. Farming is never easy. I dealt with predators threatening my chickens, diseases affecting my plants, and the constant struggle of balancing income and expenses. But these were honest challenges, problems I could work to solve through knowledge and effort, not arbitrary rules imposed by power-hungry busybodies. I dated occasionally, though finding someone who understood and appreciated the homesteading lifestyle was difficult. Most people I met through normal channels thought I was crazy for giving up a tech career to shovel goat manure. But I was not lonely. The community I had built, the animals I cared for, and the work I did all provided meaning and connection. One evening in late summer, I was finishing up evening chores when a car pulled into my driveway. It was a couple I did not recognize, probably in their early 30s. They got out and approached hesitantly. "Are you Zachary Emerson?" the woman asked. "That's me," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "I am Jennifer, and this is my husband, Mike. We are looking at buying property in this area, and someone at the county planning office told us we should talk to you about HOA issues." I smiled. "Come on up to the porch. I will tell you everything you need to know." We spent an hour talking. They were in a situation similar to what mine had been, looking at agricultural property within an HOA. I walked them through everything I had learned, gave them copies of the relevant ordinances, and explained how to verify that their intended use would be protected. "You probably saved us from a huge mistake," Mike said as they were leaving. "We were about to sign without really looking at the HOA rules." "Happy to help," I said. "That is what community is for." After they left, I thought about how far I had come. From a stressed-out software engineer who barely knew which end of a goat to feed, to someone other people sought out for advice on rural living and property rights. The transformation had been hard-earned, but it was real. As autumn arrived again, bringing cooler temperatures and the start of harvest season, I took stock of my life. I was 36 years old, owned my property outright thanks to aggressive saving before I moved, and was living exactly the life I wanted. The battle with the HOA had been a crucible, testing my resolve and teaching me to fight for what mattered. I had emerged stronger, more confident, and more connected to my community. The goats were healthy and productive. Pepper, now a senior doe, was still the queen of the herd. Her daughters, Rosemary and Thyme, had grown into beautiful adults and would be bred for the first time that fall. The cycle of farm life continued, each season bringing new challenges and rewards. I stood at the fence line one evening, the same spot where Patricia had confronted me over 2 years earlier. The memory no longer made me angry. Instead, I felt grateful. Her attempt to bully me off my land had backfired spectacularly, strengthening agricultural protections for everyone in the county and teaching me just how resilient I could be. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. My goats were settled for the night, the chickens were roosting, and the garden was putting itself to bed for the coming winter. Everything was exactly as it should be. I had found my place in the world, had stood up to those who tried to take it from me, and had won. Not just in court, but in building a life of purpose and meaning. The HOA had tried to ban my livestock, but county agricultural ordinance had indeed trumped every word of their bylaws. More importantly, I had learned that when you stand up for what is right, when you fight for your dreams despite the obstacles, you can win. And that victory, that knowledge that I had the strength to fight and succeed, was worth more than any amount of money or any easy path. I had earned this life, this land, this peace, and I would never take it for granted.